This movie was absolutely the most. You know what? Hold on a second. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Fade to Black, my annual summer show where I talk about anything and everything I feel like talking about. It's good to be back, and I can't wait for this current season's pantheon of subjects. Now, even though I don't normally do movie reviews, after coming out of The Man of Steel, I knew that this new take on The Last Son of Krypton would be something that I would want to have on record. Now, before I get into this, I have a warning. Even though I don't intend to give away any key plot points in this episode, there is a high chance that in explaining some of what I liked and didn't like about the movie, a deductive mind could piece together some things that they may not want to have spoiled for them. So, if you are such a mind and want to see the movie, I would say go see it and I'll be here when you get back. So, once again, spoiler alert, spoiler alert, spoiler alert, spoiler alert. First things first, let's talk about the $150 million elephant in the room. Stretching all the way back from the first Iron Man film, moviegoers everywhere have been on the edge of their seats waiting to see all these Marvel heroes together on one live-action screen. And with the third highest grossing movie of all time, The Avengers, giving exactly what people were dreaming of, and Iron Man 3's current ranking at number 5, it was obvious that Superman once again seemed to have quite a bit of weight on his shoulders. Now, many people, myself included, saw Man of Steel to be the last hope of seeing any hero from DC on the big screen that didn't have bat ears, and possibly usher in a live-action Justice League movie. A movie that many fans feel is long overdue, and the fact that the Avengers even had a movie before the Justice League is kind of like if Prince got into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame before Elvis. And like his character is often called to do, the projected fate of all of the DC world was in the hands of a very powerful man from Smallville, Kansas. I think it's time for me to come clean because I've done my best to keep my allegiances hidden, but I really can't pretend anymore. I've always been more of a DC fan than a Marvel fan. Nowadays, that's like saying I prefer my portable CD player to my iPod, but I am what I am. So, when I sat down in my local movie theater in full Superman costume, because that's how I roll, I was ready to see the rise of the DC universe on the heels of Krypton's last son. And what I watched was The Man of Steel. Sometimes a movie is so good that it stops you from seeing any real flaws about it until you give it some time to lose its shine and you can actually see it objectively, and the cracks start to show. This doesn't make it suddenly a bad movie by all means. Most of the time you still love it. It just makes it a non-perfect movie and you still enjoy it from time to time with a little bit more of a realistic view. Sometimes you want a movie to be so good that you ignore the giant gaping flaws in order to trick yourself into a false sense of wonder, living in a fantasy world until enough time has passed where you allow yourself to let the illusion die. Man of Steel is a good movie, but it needed to be great in order to hide its flaws, and it just didn't do that. The action sequences were spectacular. In fact, I would go so far to say that the overall visual presentation of this movie was so far above that of any other superhero movie, so far that it should be considered the standards. The angles that it took for battle to battle were so epic and interesting, and in some cases downright stunning, that if you were to judge it on that alone, it beat out the Avengers by a mile. However, there's a lot more to a movie than just how it looks. Like an attractive girl with absolutely nothing interesting to say, the movie tended to just drag its feet until you got to see the next superpowered thing. There was some talk about the movie being a more darker, edgier version of the Superman franchise, but it was really more gray than black. The tone of the movie seemed kind of blah. I mean, the lines probably sounded dark on paper, but it just didn't feel dark. It just felt there. The two dads, Jonathan Kent and Jor-El, did okay as Superman's father figures, but while Jor-El came off as unrelentlessly preachy at many points, Jonathan Kent came off as cold and distant, even at one point suggesting that Clark should let a bus full of children die. Now, here's where one could say the movie falls into the dark category, but for me it just doesn't give any structure for Superman to be built upon. Superman seemed completely fine with punching villains through a heavily populated area, with a sort of, if he dies, he dies, sense of safety. Superman is the epitome of self-sacrifice, not acceptable casualties. It was like Superman was Ner-D from Greece. We fell in love with him because he was wholesome and kind and sweet and loving and took us on long walks on the beach, but because everything has to be all edgy and dark, he had to give himself a dark hooker-fied makeover so we would like him in front of our friends. Even though, spoiler, seeing Superman actually take a life was dramatic and heart-wrenching for me as a comic book fan and a follower of Superman and in his adventures, in the movie it just kind of made you go, took you long enough. And while it was great to see a Superman movie with an actual fight in it, they did seem to be so big that you couldn't possibly imagine anything getting bigger than that. So when they tried to, it almost seemed comical, like two kids smashing around a sandbox full of ants. One of the biggest things for me was the route they took between the relationship of Superman and Lois Lane, which was a major departure from anything that had been in the comics. Now, the on-screen chemistry between Henry Cavill and Amy Adams was all but non-existent, but the storyline did very little to help me believe that they had actually developed any kind of romantic relationship, making the first kiss between them seem very awkward and forced. In fact, it would have probably been better, and I know this is crazy, but just to have not had Lois been in the movie in the first place, because it only seemed that she was there because she was Lois Lane, and Superman has to have Lois Lane, and that's just how it is now. Aside from the actual storyline, the storytelling was in question as well. Now, normally I can follow flashbacks pretty well, but the pacing of the story continuously bounced around sporadically from past to present to future, so the story didn't really flow together. And while the message of the film was hope, at least I think it was, they said hope around like 24 times, the movie gave us very little to hope for. I mean, the main conflict happens all within the same day, and hardly allows characters or me as an audience member to feel the despair you would need hope for. Protection from death, yes, but hope is more than just immediate physical safety. It's a concept that they paid a lot of lip service to, but not a lot of time showing and implementing. And then, after a 20 megaton blast of mass death and billions in property damage, the movie just ends. With a bike ride. Like everybody just went back to work the next day. And I think that's where I felt it let me down the most. Except for one little Easter egg alluding to a different well-known Superman villain, the movie just kinda stopped. No surprise shot of Gotham in a newspaper article, no war pilot washed up on a shore of some island, no Samuel L. Jackson mind-shattering reveal at the end of the credits. It was just done, and that was it. But should I have really expected more than that? I mean, yes, that's how the most successful comic book movie franchise in the world right now is doing it, but that doesn't mean they had to do it that way. I think that's what a lot of DC fans are gonna have to realize about this movie. It's a movie about Superman. Not the start of the Justice League, not Clark Kent hiding who he is, not about saving the DC franchise, just about Superman. And if that's all you want to see, then I think you're really going to enjoy Man of Steel. Because at the end of the day, Man of Steel was a good movie. And I would almost say it was a very good movie despite all of its flaws. They're just not small enough that it can be hidden by what they did very well. So, in conclusion, should I go see it? Should I not go see it? If you're asking me, I say yes. Please go see it because you will enjoy it. I think that most people will enjoy it. But I also think that the way we view Superman is vastly changing in today's culture. And next time, I'll talk about how the world sees this guy says a whole lot about how the world sees this guy. But for now, that's a wrap. Fade to black.